Okay, everybody, it is 7:35. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this little roundtable that we're doing on the state of small farming. This is kind of an informal conversation. I'm really interested to hear from you guys and what you think about this topic. I hope a lot of you were able to look at the Instagram story that kind of sparked this whole thing. I had like one of those, I don't know, come to Jesus kind of checkpoint moments when I was doing delivery somewhere in Charlottesville, and I just kind of noticed how different things were when I was dropping off to a couple of bakeries and one of these little new American restaurants. And it was hard not to notice that, like, I don't know, when I was still back in Charlottesville, which was like 6 to 8 years ago, it was a lot different. Like, I felt like there was way more competition. There were a lot more small farmers. Like, for me to get into C&O Restaurant or Maya or Oak Park Social or any of those places that's out by my way, like, you had to like bump elbows with like a lot of different people, and there was kind of like I don't know, like an unspoken courtesy rule that you tried not to step on other farmers' customers and really compete head to head, because there was kind of so much business for everybody. But it was a small world. Hard like not to it was hard not to run into people who were farming like me, raising poultry, raising eggs, things like that. And I just noticed a couple of weeks ago when I go into these restaurants, it's like, where the hell is everybody? There's like, I'm not competing with anybody now. I don't see anybody as like farm stickers up on the chef's walk-ins anymore. I'm not accidentally stepping on any toes anymore. I've got chefs contacting me now, which is a thing that never happened like 6, 7, 8 years ago. 6, 7, 8 years ago, it was like a feeding frenzy, and chefs were like beating people away. And now it's almost kind of the opposite, at least in my neck of the woods. So I was just curious, like, am I the only one that feels that way? Because I feel like there's still lots of energy, of course, in the farm to table movement. I feel like a lot of it has shifted, I think, in a good way towards food sovereignty and its cousin, food justice, and dealing with some of the problems with the farm to table movement around equity and access, and whether or not things like soil capture is or is not bullshit when it comes to stuff like regenerative ag. So it's moved in that way. But in another way, I've felt like a lot of the energy, in terms of people like really competing in the marketplace, outside of like their own CSA subscription, it seems like it's just vanished where I'm at. And I'm wondering kind of how other people feel about that, and how they feel about those other questions that are in the Patreon post. So overall, like, do we feel like small farming is gaining ground or losing ground? I think a lot of us would admit that there's a lot of churn in the industry. There's a lot of failures. It feels a lot like the restaurant industry, given the number of farms that start up and then fail. I've even had chefs hit me up and be like, "Y'all are basically us, but with like smaller capital budgets and less brick and mortar." And if we think we are winning, if we think we are losing, what exactly are we using to measure that progress, in a good direction or in a bad direction? There's no like, and I was talking to a data scientist on Instagram the other day, and we were talking about something like a sustainable farming index or something that would measure some combination of like sales and acres under management and acres restored, acres lost, like that kind of thing. But like, are there any metrics that we have besides what I've got, which is like a gut feeling? Like, I feel like this happened 8 years ago, and now I don't feel that way, and it might be bullshit. I might just be getting old and I just don't remember. Or maybe I'm just less afraid of the competition than I used to be when I was, 8 years ago. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. Showing up at restaurants at fucking 4 p.m. on a Friday, busting up dinner service and being an idiot. Like, maybe because I don't do that anymore. Maybe that's why I'm not like running into my competition, because we're not all making the same stupid mistakes anymore. Like, who knows? Are we more or less relevant than we were a decade ago? And in what way? Are we more or less impactful? Are we actually feeding more people, or are we not? Are we feeding them more affordably? Or have things really changed since like Alice Waters started, yelling at poor people about not spending enough money on food, like back in the 70s or 80s or whatever shit Rick decided to start doing that. And do we feel like the energy, like overall in the movement, is increasing? Like, are we still as enthusiastic? Are people still coming in the way that, you know, my old ass feels like they did like a decade ago? And when it comes to that thing that we talked about earlier, or that I talked about, stop using royal we, about that whole rate of churn and the number of people coming in and going out, what do we do about that? You know, how do we keep small farming from chewing people up and, you know, turning small farming into something that I think the average person could say, obviously, yes, there is progress. Yes, we are moving in the right direction. Yes, there are more of us. Yes, we are doing the, you know, take the world over thing in a good way and not a weird Russian Ukrainian kind of way. So curious to hear anybody's thoughts on that. This is a free discussion, so if anybody has any opinions on any of that, love to hear you.
I want to speak up. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay. My name is Charmaine, and I've been on the last few calls. I've not said anything or made any comments, but I just wanted to say that I appreciate the group, and I've been a farm manager. I don't own the farm, I'm the manager for 15 years. And I have to walk away because I haven't had a raise in 15 years. I'm not making a sustainable living. I'm couch surfing in the winter. I'm just, you know, I'm just having this life that is not really sustainable. I love farming, but I do feel that I need to get, you know, the real job, so to speak. And I'm kind of heartbroken, but I also, you know, I understand I need to do this, and I'm going to try to do it in a way that, you know, as I'm going out, I'm going to try to do something that helps the industry and helps the next person who's like me, who wants to have a career path. I want to help those people do it because I think it's an amazing gift to be able to be a small scale farmer if you can make it work. So I don't know about measuring the progress. For me, it would be if I could make a sustainable living, that, you know, if somebody who's been in it 15 years, if I could do it, I would feel like that was some kind of progress, but I feel like we're going backwards. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Charmaine. It's because I've seen you like on every single call. It's the first time I've seen you talk.
Yeah, I know.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure.
Anybody else? Anything to share?
I guess I'd be, you know, directly related to what you said, but also maybe a little meandering. I am curious because you mentioned metrics and you mentioned why people are leaving. I would be really interested in metrics, like some pretty hardcore metrics about what exactly is prompting people to leave. And the very vague, okay, this is not a sustainable lifestyle, is very relatable. I can relate to that. My small business shut down in 2020, but there are some specifics, right? So for Ms. Charmaine that just spoke, I think a lot of it sounded like it was directly related to 15 years no raise. I mean, that's a big deal. And that's a pretty easy thing to measure. For me personally, I worked as a farmhand up and down the East Coast for years, and then started my own small operation in 2018. We did not make it through 2020. By we, I meant me. It was completely solo. But for me, money was a huge thing, the money instability. But I also found that one of the hardest things for me, that why I didn't make it, is I actually underestimated how much I liked my community I was serving, which is strange. And I live in Virginia Beach. I'm from Virginia Beach. There's a lot of things that I could measure, right? In Virginia Beach, in the southeastern part of Virginia, Smithfield came in a long time ago. We are pretty far from slaughterhouses and processing. I just did chicken. Logistically, we're kind of isolated from some big ag connections, just for anyone to know. The money was tough. The lack of workers, knowing I couldn't afford to hire an employee and being burnt out, medical issues and things like that, right? But I had people who were interested in investing in me. I had the opportunity to work with investors and get bigger and succeed. And for me, I actually didn't trust these investors. They were kind in a lot of ways, but I didn't trust that they would allow me to really take on my vision. I thought I would have to yield to them at some point. And then my customers in Virginia Beach, I do like my hometown. There is ignorance here like anywhere else. A lot of my customers were either chronically ill. I was selling like a product that they wanted. And when your customers are chronically ill, unfortunately, they die. So that really is not sustainable. And then it was also some very difficult people to deal with. People that we have a very heavy, just viewpoints that are not related to my own, so I don't offend anyone here, that were just deal with, and they would very blatantly just make comments. So I got burnt out because I couldn't connect with this community I was trying so desperately to serve, and continuously being insulted by them. So I don't mean to be so long-winded, but is that like these, are these relatable reasons why you guys have burnt out besides the very typical no money, my health, things like that? Because I wonder if there is a way to sort of measure that in regards to relation to community and some other things that maybe aren't as obvious.
Anybody want to take a stab at that?
I will say that I do live in a very politically conservative, small rural community, and I don't quite fit in with the locals in that way. But I'm not really serving the locals in terms of my food. I'm driving 100 miles to DC to do the food. So there is a, I think it would be better if I could serve my local community, but I think I would run into some of the same issues in terms of my mindset, versus theirs. So just saying.
I'll hold my comments till my dog is not barking. My kid's friend's mom. I'll be back. Sorry.
That's fucking great. Your dog just like, no, you're done. Charmaine, I've got a similar experience to you. Like I'm right in the middle of Trump country. Like I'm sitting there at the diesel mechanic like yesterday, and there's this like big ass sign they got in the window, and it's got a picture of Trump's face like this, and it's like says, "Do you miss me yet?" And I'm just sitting here like I gotta look at this for an hour while I wait for my wife to pick me up so I can get this piece of trash diesel out of here. So yeah, but like even politically, I don't know. I don't find that as challenging for making connections with my community, because I've said this before, and like there's this weird thing as a Black dude where like when you're a farmer and they know that you're a rancher and that you can wrangle pigs and handle cattle and like cut the balls off of things and that you kill shit for a living, like they kind of feel like you're not that Black guy, which pisses me off because I'm also that Black guy. But I feel that like being in that community where you feel like if you said the wrong thing, if they actually figured out what Instagram was and found me on it, like it would be a different kind of relationship. And also I'm in a similar position to Charmaine where I don't really sell into this neighborhood because like people are cheap around here. Like they're not buying $10 pound pork chops. They're not buying, $12 pound sausage or $6 dozen eggs. So, we're selling into DC, we're selling into Richmond, we're selling into these big like urban centers where we have a lot of customers who will tolerate both our prices and my politics. But I could imagine like if I was 3 hours from DC instead of 90 minutes and I had to try to make a living here, that would be next to impossible. I think I don't know how that would work. I don't know if it could work. So yeah, at least, from my perspective, you're not alone on that. I don't know if anybody else can speak to something similar or something completely different.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Kind of a slightly different, I'm close enough, like in upstate New York, it's kind of a different vibe, I think, than other rural areas, just because we have a lot more cities and stuff. So it's more balanced, politically and whatnot. But I've been seeing and hearing from people up here, like kind of the same as you, Charmaine, where people have worked like 10 or 20 years. And it's like all of a sudden now, all of us that have been doing this a while are getting older. And like some people, you have your kids in high school, like if you have kids, or maybe like, I know we're always like retirement, like, what are we going to do? Like, if you're not, especially if you're not building equity and don't have land. And I've heard of a couple of the extension people were talking and having this conversation this winter and how they're seeing like a flood of people in the 10 to 15 year farming experience leaving agriculture now. And not because any of us want to, but because it's like the money just isn't adding up long term, and how do you balance it? And I think this is like a very common thing. It's just what I'm kind of hearing. And I've seen a number of farms by us that used to do like more CSA, more sales. And now all of a sudden everybody's like, well, maybe I'll just do a half an acre and sell at one market, just kind of cutting back to where you're farming and you have that lifestyle, but you have to get a different job just for that. And just that cost of retirement, I think definitely I'm hearing people in that situation up here. And it sucks. Sorry.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of, I don't know, I've started to call it like the green ceiling. Like there comes a point where it's like if you're not the owner, if you're not accruing equity, especially land-based equity, farming just doesn't turn around enough money to deal with the fact that you're eventually going to get old. You're going to want to retire. You can't be stooped over. You can't be stooped over rows, your whole life. I can't be loading pigs in a trailer when I'm 55. And I think a lot of people run into that. Like I've seen, I don't know, a lot of people who were attracted to our collective model, like our worker owner model, who were on the more serious side than other people I've dealt with, were specifically looking at that issue. Like, what happens when I get old? What do I own? What do I have to show for this? I had a farmer named Ash out of New Mexico who visited us for a while, and that was her chief concern. This Ash is, I don't know if she's even 30 yet, and she's already saying like, my body hurts, and it's not going to get better. Like I'm as strong as I can be, and like it's like physically it's downhill from here, and like where outside of a very narrow nonprofit industry is like, I don't know, the intellectual work or the space to be an elder and be compensated, in this movement for my knowledge and like what I could bring outside of just like being a farm worker until I drop dead. So that's real. That's real.
I would hi, I'm Tiana. I'm also in upstate New York. I've been farming here for 13 years and I've encountered all the same issues, and especially the market issue. I used to farm 7 days a week and do markets in the city and get up at 2 a.m. and go down there and work 50 hours and then come back and then start farming, and you just burn out. And especially when people, even in the city where you think people are tolerant, or throwing your vegetables at you and tell you they're too expensive and etc. And so yeah, we've tried all the various ways to handle that. I'm 44. I just opened a Roth IRA with $1,500 for my big retirement savings. I'm very proud of myself. And it sucks. And I was just talking to a friend in the Hudson Valley who is of that same like class as we are that are exiting. She sold her part of the farm to her farm partners, And when we had that conversation, I'm not ready to do that yet because I feel like the people I'm farming with, I feel like I'd be abandoning them if I left them right now. But she was saying that we were all doing this as a bridge. We were just like holding it down as a bridge till we got to the best, till we all improved the state of farming to a place that it was more welcoming. And here we are a decade or more later, and we're in the same place we were back then. And so it was a kind of demoralizing conversation. She was just like, at some point, you just have to draw a line in the sand and leave. And it was like a good wake up call for me, but it's hard. So yeah, I'm in the same space as everybody else. I'm not very hopeful about things at the moment.
So I know we've heard from a few people that are longer in the tooth in this. Younger folks that are on here, like how are y'all feeling? Like, I'm looking at some names on here. I know some of y'all are like in the sub 30 crowd. I'd be curious to hear what's it like for people that are like damn near 20 years younger than I am.
Hey, I'm Nat. I'm in that under 30 crowd. I farm outside of Charlottesville, Virginia. And my situation is I've been farming since I was 19 and was hopping around in operations for a handful of years, and then came to Virginia and worked at the operation I'm at. I started there in 2016. The manager had left several years ago, and I was just in a position to take over management there with another person. And it's one of those situations where we don't own the land or the business. We are very close to town, so all of our customers are Charlottesvilleites. They're like mostly liberal, and so I'm not really dealing with that. I do have no equity in the business, and that is something like I definitely think about. Our business is like the owner is very hands off. So as long as the books balance, we can do what we like with it. So that is like hopeful. In order to make that happen the past couple of years, it has definitely been like a pretty intense experience in terms of hours worked and just what we're doing to make it happen. And I think from my experience, like my biggest issue is just not having a backstop from anyone. It's like when things need to happen, it's me and one other person, and there's no one else on the hook for it. So that has been where all of the frustration and the difficult times really come from. Yeah, I don't know if I really have a lot else to say. Like I just want to keep farming. And, I think I'm at a good place to do it. I think there's other opportunities on the farm for other people. Like that's all. I just want to be farming on a big team farm. And I feel like I have a really good opportunity to maybe make that happen here. But it also could totally fold in 3 to 5 years. So and then I would just be like totally, I would burn myself up on the operation in a heartbeat. And I hope that doesn't happen. We'll just kind of keep seeing where it goes, I think.
Thanks, Nat. Appreciate that. And I'm looking at that Murata who got vetoed by the dog. I remember you were starting to say something.
Yeah.
Is he doing the webinar?
I have a lot of thoughts about the questions you asked in the email, and I wanted to respond to the question about like the social factor in serving the community, and just honor that I have been I'm a distributor of food, and I've seen that happen more to the generation of women farmers before mine, and feeling very ostracized from the community that they were hoping to be an ally to and a producer of wonderful food for. And that's been heartbreaking over a long period of time. And I've seen it several several times over in different communities and different scenarios and different enterprises. And I just want to say that that's very real. I think there's been a lot of sweeping that under the carpet. And I'm glad to hear someone be honest about it. And that's why I came on this call to begin with, is because I really appreciate the honesty that I've seen in your communications, Chris. And I think these are honest questions, and I definitely would like to hear more. So I'll stop there for now.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Anybody else? It's an open floor. Like I'm so curious about everybody's stories here. And again, real quick in the chat, I'm going to put the questions from the Patreon post. So if people kind of need those quick reference, just give me 1 sec.
While you're typing, this is Mary Ellen again in New York. I definitely, like, kind of in the same way, like, I think one of the things I really like is the discussion you've started about, like, you know, costs and money and like compensation, and like how can people farming collaboratively or working all together make it work better for everyone. But I just feel like I see the cost of startup, especially like vegetables is our area. Like the startup cost has gone from, like, I started my first farm in 2002 and it was on $3,000. And like, I made more money, like dollar for dollar then than I do now. And I feel like you would need, you know, $150,000 to start the farm that I started then. And that's not even buying the land. And I just don't see like how to capitalize new farmers and incoming farmers. It seems like such a challenge. And then I feel like as farmers like us who are getting older, I see like, what's our obligation? Like, we don't have kids, like we can help start other people, get them going and give them that jump. But it's like, is that a feasible model? Like, are the small farmers that we help going, is it ethical to start somebody on a farm path if they can't make enough money to retire? Like, it's kind of like all like chicken and egg together that, you know, you struggle with, and then you're trying to deal with the farm, but you're like dealing with these ethical questions too.
That's interesting, Mary Ellen. What's that's the first I've heard that. I think the idea that it takes more money now than it would like relatively in the past. What do you think is driving that, at least for you?
I think just honestly, like when I started farming in 98, like climate change wasn't that big of an issue. So like the farms that I learned how to grow vegetables on in the Northeast didn't have irrigation systems. You didn't need row cover. People didn't spray jack. You know, whereas now, like if we don't row cover 30% of our crops, like we can't bring something to market at all. So it's just like all of these, you know, you're buying plastics and high tunnels and greenhouses. Like it's just interesting that like I worked on farms, you know, that had 100 CSA members and didn't have a greenhouse because they just started seeds under lights and windows and the weather was more stable feeling and stuff. So I think it's just like the problems that small farm wants to solve, you know, climate change and sustainability and stuff are causing it harder to farm and more money to invest up front. And then that's before even everything started shooting up now with like gas and plastics and COVID. But it definitely, like, I helped start a couple farms as a manager, and it was like each time it was like, let's triple what it took, and then let's start another one and we'll triple that, you know. And now it's like, is it possible to start a small farm if you don't have money to start off with for vegetables? I don't know.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I definitely feel that. I get a lot of DMs from people and emails and stuff, people asking like, how do I get started farming? And yeah, the knee-jerk reaction is, I don't know if I want to tell you. Because like, I don't know what happens to you in 20 years, bro. I don't know what happens to me in like 10 or 20 years. I don't know what this looks like. And it's interesting to hear from you, like, because I'm not a vegetable guy. Like for me, it's all grass. And I don't know, I feel like grass and trees, at least in Virginia, tend to be a little more resilient towards and forgiving towards that kind of thing. I don't really have to worry about sprays, and you know, grass does what grass does. But wow, that's incredible to hear. Like, I mean, it's common sense. You know, people are spraying more, that you need more season extension. The hots are getting hotter, the colds are getting colder, and vegetable people really kind of eat it. Whereas like for a rancher like me, like looking at the grass back here, like the grass is growing now and it's kind of nice in a way, like, you know, we don't have to feed hay in times we normally would, but yeah, that's something. Thank you for sharing that.
Mary Ellen, I was going to ask you too, based on what you said, besides climate change, do you find, because I think one of the biggest things right now is that risk is actually riskier. So debt is more risky than it was previously, and it's continuing that way. I might be wrong on that, but like to be in debt now, I worked for a farmer 10, 15 years ago. I was shocked. I mean, he was a pretty strong guy, but he got injured. He paid a couple $1,000s for his injuries. He was okay. I got injured mildly less than that 5 years ago. I was screwed. So things are like every sort of debt you acquire is just riskier and harder to get out of now, is what I notice. And people are also starting their adult lives with more debt already. So I don't know if that's something that anyone else here can relate to, but it seems like that, along with the climate change you mentioned, is a really big small business risk for anybody, let alone farming as well. Risk is just riskier.
I feel like I'm a bad person to be able to speak on that, because every time we took debt, it was like the best luck on the timing. So our interest rates, including my school loans, are really low. But like I see that with employees coming in, you know, if you owe money for school, like, and are paying $500 a month, like, you know, that's kind of a crippling debt.
Yeah, I'm also one of those like kind of spoiled people where like I had maybe $5,000 of student loan debt when I graduated. And like I think I paid that off like with my first 3 paychecks. Like I was just done. And student loan debt is just so much, like I graduated from college 20 damn years ago. It's like it's hard to think about, and just how much more expensive it's gotten, and how it's just rocketing ahead of inflation, and it's just eating people. It's that whole thing where like the economy now is just based on selling people money, and the poorer you are, the more they go after you. So yeah, it's interesting here, like to hear how the structural issues in the economy have changed and are really like throwing up roadblocks just in the last like 5 to 10 years. I don't know. Any other thoughts?
Hey, what's up, everybody? I could just share a little bit about my situation, which is maybe unique, maybe not. Just curious. I'm out in Oregon, so representing the West Coast on this call, and I have like a sort of unique situation insofar as like I work on a farm, right? I don't own the land, but the older couple that owns it, it's an orchard, so it's a lot of fruit trees and nut trees, things like that. But they don't have necessarily enough money to afford to pay me as much as there is work to be done, obviously. And so in compensation, as part of it, they've been offering me like access to land and equipment and stuff like that to start doing like blueberries and start doing raspberries and stuff that they're not already farming. But like in terms of like the startup costs, what I'm finding is tough is that like I'm not working enough to be able to pay for any sort of like extra stuff, and so I'm kind of bound to like the stuff that's offered to me there. It's like all like very friendly, almost like family type scenario, like folks I've known for like 20 years at this point, like worked off and on their farm for like that entire time since I was a teenager. But yeah, I'm just kind of curious like how people are seeing like any arrangements that are made between, you know, farm employees in order to kind of start their own thing. Even looking like I'm like looking at that and being like, wow, this is like really, really an uphill battle. You know, I'm working like another several like side hustles as well just to make things happen. But like, yeah, just kind of wanted to share that, I suppose.
Car trick. I had a similar situation where I was trying to at first see if I could maybe take a portion of the small farm that I'm working on. But I ran into the fact that it was a land trust. I didn't really realize that at first when I first started working there. And because that was kind of my thought in the back of my head was that, all right, work here for a few years, apprentice, learn how everything goes, and then maybe take a small portion and maybe become more of a consultant to the farm and maybe start my own small business. You know, I don't know, that's what I had in mind. But it turns out that there's a land trust on a conservation land trust on the property. And so that wouldn't give me any equity in the land. And I think for some people that works out. I've heard of people that have large families and they just want some place to live on and grow, and they're okay with not really owning it in the full sense of the word. But I needed more security of some type to be able to say, well, at least I could do something with that land to turn it into an asset for myself. And instead of just saying, well, you know, when I'm done, I can sell the house maybe, and if I could even build a house on it. But the person that would get the land would have to adhere to all of the land trust rules. They wouldn't have their own autonomy. So that turned into it. And also I would end up still working on this land and not making enough money to be able to retire. So, you know, it just was a circular problem. And, you know, I couldn't find a way kind of out of it. That's all I can say about that right now.
I've got kind of a, oh wait, Miranda, were you saying something?
Sure, I just wanted to, well, my dog's not barking and the neighbor kid has been picked up. Maybe it's a good time to chime in before it gets exciting around here again. So I'm a distributor of food up here in Maine, and I've been doing this with my family since 1998, at which point I was a kid. But so I've been doing it long enough to have seen not one generation leave the land, but now two generations, and starting on like a third generation in some cases on the same land. And so I feel very privileged to have been a witness to that. But I've also seen, I was going through, I just left QuickBooks Enterprise and moved to a different ERP system, and I had to say goodbye to legions of data, including, you know, rosters and rosters and rosters of vendor names that I no longer buy from. And so similar, Chris, to your driving around and delivering and being like, where are all these people I really didn't like seeing, but now they're not here at all. You know, a lot of them I had very fond memories of, and many I said, wow, that was really, we both really struggled to make business work together. But there has been a lot of churn, and so I had a lot of data and a lot of history. And I can say that here in Maine, we do like to brag about the fact that we put 1,000 new farmers on the land in the last 10 years. I think that is slowing here. So there are some metrics on new farmer placement, new farmers coming into Maine. We definitely have seen a lot of the burnout and breakup scenarios. So the wear and tear on personal relationships. And I have seen from a business perspective that the direct-to-consumer models, the several direct-to-consumer models, the farmers market, the CSA, the now the direct-to-consumer, maybe meal prep, whatever craziness we're into at the moment on direct-to-consumer, has a kind of a two-folded effect that's, I think, holding back young farmers gaining some ground, which is that it's very enchanting. And I think there's an allure of getting the full dollar from the consumer for the product, but it does stretch the farmer into all those different roles in the food system. And I think that has a 10-year cycle of like catastrophe written all over it. And we don't have time on this call for me to wax poetic about it, but I think that does affect the level of churn. Is just, you know, people doing their 3 to 5 year stint at the farmer's market and then doing another model for a few years, trying some wholesale, maybe struggling with that. And I'm only talking about vegetable farming because meat and dairy farming are kind of very different industries here. But I have seen that churn. I think that one place that I'm not seeing churn, that, or I'm seeing an opposite, less attrition, and it in some ways troubles me, in some ways interests me, is in the Amish communities in Maine. And so they're using a very old-fashioned model, which is to raise their farmers themselves within their families. And I think that we're seeing a lot of in-migration from Amish communities from all over the country to Maine, often predicated on forming new communities around religion, and also the fact that it still rains here. So touching on what someone said earlier about climate change. So I don't really have a list of solutions, although I might write down a couple as we continue to talk, but those, I am seeing what you're saying. So I want to assure you that you're not crazy. Like, you hopefully are wiser as you get older. But I don't think it's just that you get delivering earlier, although kudos to you for that change. I think that this is actually a trend going on. I guess the models that I've seen to keep people on the land that I think work well are multi-generational farms that are very structured about that. They don't just assume the kids will stay on the farm. They sell the farm to the kids in a favorable transition model. Selling the farm outright to another couple seems to have a good retention rate. So when a farm actually is built and then sold to another farmer, even with good loan terms, that seems to result in farmers staying longer and having a higher survival rate than starting up a farm from scratch with no infrastructure and little working capital. Honestly, farms that are partnerships of more than one couple seem to have a good endurance rate versus one couple farms. And then farms that have, I'd say, like a 30-30-30 split between on-farm retail, off-farm retail, and then wholesale, those seem to do fairly well with adjusting to changing market conditions and being able to kind of weather the tides. That's what I see with the roster of vendors I've worked with. Stop.
Really appreciate that. That's great insight. Thank you so much for all that. That is great. I mean, I think it speaks to something that Nat was kind of talking about, especially when you were talking about the ones that succeed seem to be the farms that are bigger in terms of having more people. I feel like the Amish are a lot more, I don't know, it's one of my least favorite terms in the world, but self-reliant. They build a lot of their own stuff. Their supply costs are relatively low. They avoid certain taxes that a lot of us have to pay because of how their communities are organized. But yeah, like if somebody breaks their leg, like it's not the end of the world. Like, you know, Uncle Josiah is gonna like pick that up and so your legacy or whatever. And I think that's a lot of kind of what the ethic is, at least that Skywoman's going for, is how do we start farming together, and how do we, I don't know, both from a practical perspective, like how would we combine markets, or how would we operate in a kind of cooperative way when we might be distributed between different places and we're not necessarily all on like a big, you know, either a big family farm or multi-generational farm or a collection of families all together, you know, all on either one place or in places that are like really close to each other. But, you know, even if we're operating at a regional level, how do we do this so we're not just so alone? That's kind of how I've always felt. And that's been, you know, when I have my moments where I want to quit, it's when I'm by myself. You know, it's when the windstorm rips the cover off the Henmobile and it's just me. That sucks. And I feel like from the Amish I know, if something rips off the Himobile, it's never just one guy standing in a field. It's the whole family, everybody from like age 8 to 50, like out there making it happen together. Dog scratching at the door. I'll be right back. Y'all go ahead.
Can everyone hear me? Someone would have to say yes.
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 Hi, I'm new to this community. I actually just signed up today. And I did that because the questions that Chris asked is something that I've been searching for actually like a decade. And I am from Missouri, and that's where I started farming. But I moved to California, and that's where I'm at now. And I used to work really close with the MU Extension Office in Missouri with this nonprofit that I worked with. And so the specific extension agent, he knew every single farmer in Missouri, and he would put on these wonderful workshops and for free. And I attended every single one I possibly could. And at the end of one of them, I asked him, I said, do you know of any farm that is sustaining itself outside of using its family resource? Because every farm that I knew in Missouri couldn't sustain multiple workers at a competitive rate, like which is whatever in this conversation already, couldn't give them, insurance, could barely house them, could not take care of them in a way that individuals need to be cared for. And he stopped for a second and he like went through like every farm that he could think of. And at the end of it, he was like, to be honest with you, I know 0 farms in the state of Missouri that could honestly pay their employees a wage that they need to survive that would support them and their family, because they solely relied on the big family model of their children working next to them, their sisters and brothers working next to them. Like that's how these specifically vegetable farms or pig farms or dairy farms survived. And so I was like, okay, I know now this can't really work in Missouri unless you have a millionaire that's backing you, which I have seen in one farm. If you have huge USDA grants and the ability to write grants that can back you and support your startup, or you have family. And so I moved out to California and I started learning all about the farming as much as I could out here, small farms specifically, how they sustain themselves, how they kept going. And something, now I live in the rural like Sierra foothills out here, and something that I've noticed is that the same situation, very wealthy people are backing small farmers. They invest in them because they believe in that food system. Because it keeps them going. And something else that someone spoke of is also this trade of living exchange for work and having a house, right? So I live in a situation now where I live in this nice house, and with my husband and my child, in exchange, we take care of the land, and we have assets in the land now. And so community living, to be honest with you, is in the last 10 years that I've been trying to study how small farms are going to succeed and work. What I've seen with my friends and just round, is that this idea of community coming together in small farms to start farming that can then go into the market together. So you have community hands that are close to you and supporting you. So you're not the only person working in the chickens when you're sick or when something breaks. You have backup. You're basically creating the same model of these family farms, but you're doing it in a community setting. And yes, possibly with one person who's invested in it. So I'm always on the search to see how small farms are making it work outside of 70-hour work weeks, pushing their body to the limit, and just their whole life force being drained from the actual farming side. So if anyone has any information, send my way of how you make it work with only working 40 hours a week and living a really meaningful life still, and still loving that farming part, I would really appreciate it. And also, I hope my experience was somewhat helpful, especially to the man who was talking about the living situation, and like I just came from a situation where I was guaranteed a house in exchange for to start up a market farm for this person. And then also he would give me a piece of land later on to develop my own market on. But I just want to let you know, when I did that, there were so many strings attached to it that I was so tired. You know, I had to work my 40 hours to live in this house, and then, you know, to create his market farm. Then how the heck am I going to have another 40 hours of energy with the family to then go build my own market farm on the side? So it was really just about creating this intentional space with community members where we're all on the same level of understanding of what we're trying to achieve in our farming aspect, and how we can support each other to get to that next step. But yeah, I think that's all I have right now.
Thank you for that. Does anybody have any direct responses to that? Sorry, my children are screaming. I'll be right back. All right, well, now the screaming stopped. I mean, one of the things that I would put in is, you know, I've finally gotten to the point where I'm not, you know, doing that 70-hour, 80-hour work week. I was definitely there. I was definitely there at a point where our markets were immature, where we were spending a lot of time at farmers market and these really kind of, I mean, I'd say ineffective, low traction ways of turning your product into money and making a living on the farm. Trying to think of what changed. It was, I mean, a lot of it was luck. We had, I talked about this on one of the podcasts, like one of the game changers for us was just when, you know, when the summer of 2020 happened and suddenly everybody was looking at Black farmers. Like I just Forrest Gumped my way into like what would otherwise have been hundreds of thousands of dollars and God knows how many thousands of hours of marketing work. You know, like shoe leather work at farmers markets, getting people's emails, like knocking on doors, like all like that stuff just showed up. Like for once, like for the first time, maybe in my life, it paid to be Black for like a month. And it was like all I needed was like that 1 month. And like suddenly with this market here that I don't have to build and now I just have to maintain, like that became a job that just wasn't so hard. So like, you know, these days, my work in the fields, doing marketing, doing driving, that kind of thing, I'm maybe doing 35 to 45 hours a week, even in the high season, which is interrupted occasionally by like going back and forth to auction, like for cattle and stuff like that, which actually speaks to something that Patrick was talking about, that I'll mention in a minute. I feel like when I was creating like the collective of collectives back last year, and the whole idea of 2021 was that there's only most of the money, most of the living, most of the ability to have a career path in agriculture is beyond the farm gate. It's in the food system, it's in the processing part, it's in the distribution part, it's in cold chain, it's in food safety. It's like we tend, if you like go and read agriculture textbooks, which I highly recommend anybody here do, like if you really want to get into farming, like read the conventional stuff, like read agribusiness management 101, like coming out of like Ohio State University or something. Like these books are eye-opening. We in the farm to table movement tend to focus so much on the production sector. We don't, and we're talking about like the bottom of the production sector, like the before the farm gate part of the farm sector. We're talking about like the Wendell Berry, the Alice Waters part of the production sector. We don't talk about how much of the livings to be made are beyond that. You know, and making sure that food can actually get to people safely and conveniently and affordably and all that stuff. And we also tend not to look at the input sector where we get all of these things that we talk about we need, like where the plastics come from, where the covers come from, where the steel comes from, where do the chicks come from, where does the seed stock come from? Like we tend to be a very narrowly focused industry. And I think that's part of what gets us, is that we're focusing on what is fundamentally the least profitable and most difficult part of the value chain. We are in the field on the production. And when you look at the way conventional agriculture has evolved in a very toxic way, they've divested the farm part. If you look at how Purdue operates, how Cargill, not Cargill necessarily, but like Smithfield and like the big meat operators, because meat is what I know, they own everything but the farm. They don't want it. You know, people take out $500,000 loans to build these giant chicken houses, and Purdue will, you know, give you the chicks. They own the chicks. They'll give you the feed. They own the feed, but your ass owns the farm, and you take the prices. Everything before the farm and everything after the farm, they own, and that's where they make their money. And I feel like, you know, for us, if we're not going to become Amish, if we're going to create a different kind of community-based agriculture that isn't kind of revolved around religious dogma and really, really strict and kind of confining gender roles and some of the not so fun stuff that comes with being Amish, because I know some Amish people who've been shunned, which is odd, like can't go home basically. I think a lot of that is going to revolve around creating these larger integrated organizations that are going to require probably more planning, more capital raising, and more business planning than I think a lot of us are used to, especially people that are coming into it the way I did, which is from like the romance side of it. You know, to be able to have a healthy place to raise your family and to be out here in the field and enjoying the sunrise and enjoying the sunsets and all this stuff. But when we look at what works, when we look at the places that provide a career path where there's something for you to do when you're 20 years old and 30 and 40 and 50, and hopefully when you turn 60, 65, you can actually retire and not have to die in the field. It's an organization that involves the entire value chain, and does it at scale, so that speaking of what Nat was talking about, so there's redundancy in positions, so you can take time off and things don't fall apart. So there's still somebody on the kill floor when somebody's like taking a vacation in Jamaica or whatever. I don't know, that's kind of what I feel about it. And I feel like a lot of people who were like me, who are still making it and aren't killing ourselves, have been similarly lucky. Like, it's, you know, any amount of success is going to require luck. You know, I was born with 2 hands and I can walk and I can speak. But, you know, that's something you can't really take for granted, because a lot of people can't. But at the same time, it's like, if 2020 hadn't happened the way it did, I don't know what would have happened. I might be back in tech. I might have flamed out and started a nonprofit, like you know, happens so often in agriculture. And then before I forget, and I'm sorry, I'm taking up a whole bunch of time, but Patrick had mentioned something about you know, being in a situation where there's all this land, but not nearly enough capital to deal with it, to like utilize land properly. And I found that situation. I've run into that situation here at Stratford Hall, where we've got like 100 acres of pasture, but like, how many chickens can you raise on 100 pasture or on 100 acres? It's a lot. It's more than I can do. It's more than like 10 or 20 people can do. So honestly, like, one of the things that I've decided to do, like talking about retirement, my IRA at this point is cattle. Like, I'm trading Angus cattle now. I got 100 acres of some of the best grass in Virginia, and I'm buying like 300-pound steers at auction. I'm putting them on pasture. I'm raising them rotationally. I'm, you know, taking advantage of what we got here and putting 300-400 pounds on them and selling them back at auction. You know, that's me acting as a backgrounder in the conventional agriculture system, like, full stop. And like, there's ethical questions around that. Like, what does that mean? You know, if I'm in a situation where I can't do, like, you know, I would love to be able to run 100 head of beef like on this property and be able to finish like 20 a year, but I can't get the processing slots. I couldn't do it if I wanted to. I couldn't do it if I could kill the things myself and sell it legally. There's just not enough. So I think we have to sometimes find ways to get creative around how do we maximize what we're given. And I still have, like, I'm still wondering, like, I look at these cows out in the field and they're rotating and they're building soil and they're helping with biodiversity and they're doing this thing. But at the end of the day, they're going back to auction. They're going to wind up in a feedlot. What does that mean? I don't necessarily feel guilty about the fact that I might actually be able to retire and not wind up like Ulysses S. Grant, you know, eating hardtack or whatever when I'm 90 years old. But I think that's a question a lot of us face as we think about the fact that we're not always going to be 20.
I have a question for you, Chris, or anybody here, and also a thought, and it might be a very unpopular opinion, so I try and be careful with this. So I work as an insurance agent, which is extremely dull but very lucrative. And one thing that stands out to me a lot, and Chris, you talked about this in an Instagram live months ago, and it like sparked me. Someone mentioned having trouble community in Florida, and you mentioned the individualism of the farmer and like the ruggedness and how, you know, the narrowness. And what always is on my mind, I always think of tech as an analogy, which partially problematic, but tech is made its way into everything: logistics, manufacturing, real estate, everything. It's there. It's forced itself to be ubiquitous, right? And food is already ubiquitous. It's not in the revolutionary sense, but it's already ubiquitous. So I think about this in like a big picture sense of like, at what point and how, like, how is it safe? What are the safe ways to, and how is the appropriate way to, for farmers in this farm to table kind of movement to reach out and think big picture and connections, right? So the example I'll give is like, I work in insurance, property insurance. Just a fun fact, if you are in Florida and you have a piece of property, the insurance company is investing in fossil fuels. But if your insurance is in Florida, your insurance is really higher because flooding is riskier. Well, they're investing your premiums into fossil fuels, which are making sea levels rise by you and charging you more money. That's how it works, right? Simple. And insurance does a lot of good things, but it has its problems, right? That's an underwriting problem. So when I think of farmers having insurance, when I think of underwriting, when I think of what is quantified, and most importantly, what is not quantified, I'm like, there's no chain of communication, a real chain of communication, I don't think, between this sector of farming, small table farming, and who's developing underwriting, right? There's no chain of communication between small farmers and like the people designing AI for logistics. And logistics is a big problem. And it's now all artificial intelligence is a big part of logistics. Well, does the small farmer movement have a spokesperson at that table, kind of thing? And so I guess what I'm trying to say is like, it also, you want to be careful, because I know the organic movement has been, and farm, you know, all these different terms have been taken over in a corporate sense and have been capitalized in the sense where, yes, we should be wary of. But it's also like, what I always think about it, I'm like, all these industries they're all connected to us, and we don't always, like, when I was farming, I didn't have the time to think of anything else about like, who am I going to beg to volunteer to process my chickens? Like, there's no time. I had no luxury of these thoughts, right? But you know, now that I'm not in it, I'm like, oh, I can philosophize. And so I wonder about that. Like, what kind of group of people is like, is there room for an in-between community? Is there room for like a group of advocates or some type of folks whose role is to communicate with small farmers and then communicate with maybe like the capitalism that has us by the nuts all the time, without also like conform, like, I'm kind of speaking in circles, but does what I'm saying make sense? Like, how do you kind of connect with big picture things that are running your day-to-day policy change without compromising and things like that? If that makes any sense, what I'm saying.
I can respond, but I don't want to take up all the airtime. Does anybody have a response to that? Because that's my kind of thinking for real.
Well, I guess I could say that I might kind of be one of those people, you know, like I'm often able to put a foot in both worlds. I did grow up farming and work with farmers every day, and then also am basically I sell food I'm the salesperson. So in what Chris was saying I'm one of those people sort of tangential to the farm that's part of the food system. And yeah, I come across that all the time where it does seem like, like I can't count how many times in the past month where I have said, what time has tech saved me today? Like they really don't, it doesn't seem I've been on tech support more than the hours that I've saved. And I do think sometimes like there's a big disconnect between reality and like who's serving who and where do these things get really lost in translation. I think that's that battle charge would be a great one for the cooperative extension to hear more often. I think they sometimes struggle to find their place between like what chemical du jour is needed and genetics are needed and school garden networks, so like there are other fish to fry in that landscape. And I think that co-op extension folks are, career partners who want to help and have a lot of different kinds of connections, and they get paid to go to meetings. So not only to go to meetings, but they do get paid to go when they do go to meetings, unlike farmers. So yeah, I hear that. And I think that one thing that I've been hearing, and maybe it might be helpful too, is if perhaps we looked not so narrowly at like how many farmers are we losing or gaining, but our career, is our career path varied enough? Like we don't seem to like really worry about like whether we lose line cooks or not, but we really worry if we lose like independent restaurant operators, because they actually are doing so many jobs in one that there's very few people that can do all of those jobs: design the restaurant, create the menu, source the food, cook the food, create the experience, and then do that year after year over and over again. And so we may be tough on our farmers in terms of like how long we expect them to endure and how much we expect them to do all at once. And if we were maybe a little more forgiving of ourselves as farmers and tolerant of those lateral career moves the way we would be in most other industries, I think we might see more success in what we've accomplished. Like, we've all seen like New York Times article after New York Times article about the chef who became the farmer, and this guy named Chris who was in tech and became a farmer, and like, everyone who moved into farming from other careers. And maybe we should see farming as like part of a career continuum of some type or another. Maybe it's not such a bad thing that people move out of farming and bring that experience with them. That might be a more hopeful way to perceive the situation. And maybe give us those ambassadors in other places that Jessica was talking about.
I've often been happy for people when they start farming, or when they stop farming, because like when they stop, like there's a reason they stopped, and it's good for them to not do that anymore. Yeah, and I've not always kept track of what they end up doing after. But it does feel, it's like such a difficult admission, because you just inherently focus your entire life on it, and it's like a hobby, it's your work, it's where all your relationships are. It might be where like your partner is. So yeah, it's a whole rewriting of a personality, sometimes. But I don't know if that really addresses the partners that can be like a middle ground. That can feel so difficult, because there's like so many people who want to help in this farming space, and their intentions can be really good, but sometimes, it's just, if you're not directly involved in the food industry and food production, there's just not a lot of common ground sometimes. like if you're in the tech space and you have no manual labor experience, no farming experience, no like production experience, how could you possibly address the issues? But maybe like if you work for Amazon and like we're talking about distribution, like there's definitely something to be, you know, gained from that. It might be very specific.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I had just a quick question in regards to what Amber was saying about the USDA programs. Has anybody found success in that? Like, do you guys agree with what she's saying? Because it seems like it's a really good idea just to put yourself in that census to be able to have your voice heard more. That was a good idea in my opinion, but I'm not sure if that's actually true or not.
Yeah, I definitely filled out the ag census form when it came out. The USDA is like a big resource. There's a ton of money out there. There's a lot of cheap loans. There's a lot of grants, especially if you like strike in the right place at the right time. Right now, just as an example, like there's a small meat producer grant program that's out there right now where they're basically giving away free money to people that want to start up poultry, pork, and like small ruminant processing facilities, and they'll give you, I think it's something like $200,000 or 20% of your project value, whichever is less, I believe is how it works. And that's something I'm looking at like right now. There's also a lot of like almost under the table type money coming out of the USDA. Like I remember back when Sarah Mock and I were still friends, like her ability to find where like the secret money is was uncanny. Like they were offering, it was something like 20 cents per chicken to any chicken producer who could like prove that they'd raised X number of chickens. And like, it's not like you needed receipts, like it could be written down on a fucking napkin. It was just free money. Like it was Game of Thrones, like back alley type weird stuff. Like the amount of money that flows in the farms, as long as you know where to get it, like that's real. And I think that speaks to what Jessica was really talking about, is that the ecosystem around what it would take to make this movement successful is so much wider than just farmers. It's why Skywoman basically started like looking at tech people and trying to solve problems on the tech side of things. It's why there's lawyers there, there's accountants there, there's apparently insurance people there. There's people that have all of these different types of expertise, and like even like the Sarah Mocks of the world, the Sarah Tabers of the world, who know like how the machine works on the inside, like away from the farm, like where's the money buried? Who do you have to talk to get your permits exactly? What do you have to say to them? What are their bugaboos? What are their like, I don't know, what are the things that they need to hear in order to give you what you need? It's community, and it's a diverse community, not just of farmers, but of people who, you know, like Miranda, like work in distribution, people who work in insurance, people who work in all of these support industries that we depend on, whether we like it or not, and need to be in more constant conversation with, and need to, if we can, be an intimate part of these communities. And yeah, like going back to Anissa's question, people who know the USDA would be part of that. Like I would love to get my my FSA guy, who's like a sweet guy, like he'd jump on this call. And you know, you'd be surprised when these guys spill their guts. This is me just spitballing. I think we tend to be a little bit, I don't know if afraid is the right word, maybe leery or skeptical or cynical about federal institutions, and about money that comes from kind of nefarious sources, especially when it's coming through the USDA. But it's there. And we know how to get it. And if we can get it and turn it to positive uses, I think things could get a lot better, and the state of small farming could be a lot better. I agree 100% with Jessica. Like it's like our webs need to be bigger. There needs to be more connections. There just needs to be more communication and deeper community with more types of people in this movement.
So I have a question
Yeah,
related to that.
I want to speak. Oh, sorry. who's speaking
Go
now. Okay, I was going to
You
speak
can go
real
ahead.
quick. I was with a nonprofit who got awarded $1 million from 3 different grants to the USDA in their like 5th year of existence. And the USDA is a huge asset to farmers and non-profit organizations. The one thing that I did see in this, just so that everyone knows, is that it is almost like a part-time job. And so what the person who's speaking to about like having all these different people on in your corner, when you start pursuing USDA grants, the relationship with your agent for your area is extremely important. And then having a member of your community that will help you write these grants and keep you updated on the quarterly reports that are required for USDA grants. I don't know of a grant where it's just gave you money and you received it and you took it. They tend to have reports done, so to make sure that like you're living up to what they gave you the money to do. And so this is a form of like partnership that I would love to see for the small farmer, because like Chris was saying, there's so much out there for people. From my experience with talking with individuals, they're really scared to work with the USDA because of all the strings attached to that money. So like, how do we make it to where it's doable to navigate through those attachments and to receive that money from them?
The what you were saying about USDA also brings up a question that I've been having. I do policy work, and I've been thinking a lot. My grandfather was a farmer back in the 60s, and I was reading about like how much more prolific cooperatives were for farmers that were small to mid-sized in his day. Like, it was just a given that there was resources out there, and there's something compelling about what's forming here. But I'm wondering whether it would make a difference if there was more publicly funded resources to help cooperatives or other types of kind of networked organizations like we're talking about, where the vertical integration is being owned from below instead of above form. Like, what would move the needle to make that kind of formation, like what Skywoman is trying to achieve, in its own circle, like easier to achieve for a wider range of farmers? Like, I don't know if anyone who's been a part of cooperative formation in the past has any thoughts about, what kind of things policy could fill in the gaps to make this kind of like more regional integration of smaller mid-sized farms feasible. So I'm just curious if anyone has any thoughts about that.
I wasn't planning on jumping in, but because I joined a little late, sorry. But I did environmental law up in Vermont and was tracing farm bill funds through USDA from the federal level all the way down to distribution at the local level. And I sat in on an annual meeting. Like, there was a series of 2 meetings open to the public, and they basically allocated $10 million just like on a guess. And there was only one farmer that showed up, and like me and some other paid people. So if you were to show up to those meetings with like, you can get on like the state technical committees, or they have like meetings open to the public. You can email the ag person at NRCS in your state and get on their email list. Those meetings annually, like at least in my state, I've been trying to get farmers to go because I was like, they handed out $10 million and no one showed up.
What meetings are those you're talking about, Lauren? You said they were USDA, like what kind of committees were those?
That was an NRCS state meeting for conservation funding. The reason I was late was we're actually talking about getting organized on that in our state, or my old state. I'm in a different state right now, but Vermont farmers are talking about getting organized on that.
I wanted to jump in again too, if possible, just to share like a success story, rather because my earlier one was all doom and gloom about being a small market farmer. But the new model that we're working with is more of a collaborative community-based model. And I've been working as a farmer in the summers and then doing whatever I can for nonprofits in the winter to survive for about a decade here. And so I've worked with a bunch of different ag orgs around. And when I first showed up, it was a real fiefdom, real competitive about resources. Everybody was really shit talking each other and all these different organizations. And it was really just a horrible environment. And I didn't see any real work being done to support farms. But over the years, there has been a shift in the staffing of all these organizations. And we've all kind of gotten to know each other through National Young Farmers and other kind of just social avenues. And so now, now that we have something to organize around in this sense, in our case, it's a land project. Everybody's really coming to the table and showing up and supporting each other from all their different, wheelhouses. And it feels really great for the first time I've lived in this community, where there's no red flags. Like people are showing up, being transparent, being honest, being helpful, and things feel like there's hope for the first time since I've been here. So I just want to say this, like casting a wider net, building community, taking the time to get to know the place you're at, like has really helped in our situation, I think. I mean, it remains to be seen if this is successful or not, but for now it feels really good.
Yeah, I just want to say that like every single good thing that's ever happened on the farm that has been a relief has just always been from the community at large and from the relationships that we have built. And that's just like so clearly key. And without those, it's just all over. So that, that's really all I've got to say is I just want to kind of second that just how important that is. Yeah.
And especially to the point of there's been a lot of, it's the last few people have talked about kind of getting our hands on more capital and more of the resources of the state. I think that really fits in nicely with, I mean, the more I've had time to think about, I think when Ray Ellen was saying that it's getting more and more expensive to get into this, like I was just thinking like the big thing, being land, being the cost of equipment going up, the cost of gas going up, like it's just getting, you're right. I mean, the curve is going like this to get into farming. It is not as DIY and easy to get into it now as it used to be. And I think this kind of thing is going to become more and more important to make sure that we have resources outside of just farms and farmers to make sure that we're able to get capitalized and resourced the way we need to be, so that we can get off the ground in the first place.
This conversation does make me wonder, like, if there might be, like, I think somebody earlier was talking about like data and metrics, but like last year, or was it the year before, when they had the CFAP money from the USDA, where it was like you could get like 5% of your sales just cash because of the pandemic. And for us, that was like a really big help, kind of like you were saying, Chris, like all of a sudden you didn't have to, you had the sales coming in. It was like this bonus money we hadn't anticipated, and it let us like catch up on all these things and then get ahead and be like more proactive. And it was interesting how like this relatively small percentage of a 1 year thing like kind of got you up to the next level. And it would be interesting to see if there were metrics, because I know a lot of small farms got that. Like, did a lot of people's financial situation from 2020 to 2021 improve marginally despite the pandemic, in part because of that? Like, it would be hard to pull out from the numbers, but I know like on our farm, it did help, like that little extra bit, that was a bonus.
Sorry to take up more space, but I just remembered another really great community thing that happened, which was that we engaged with economic development a couple of years ago and got all the farms to get a portfolio of what they would do if they had money together, and approached economic development with this like case, with like a really nice deck of this farm would do this farm would do that. And it was compelling enough for them to set aside funds for the farms, and we all got a big grant that year. My farm got about 30 grand, it was our second year of farming, and it got us, some much needed equipment and jumped us from a scrabbly little in the dirt messed up farm to an actual farm. And that only happened once, but it was a great leg up for a bunch of farms in our region. And it was through that sort of cooperative, like dreaming and then presenting our case that we got some money.
Who did you get that from again, Tiana?
It was through economic development through the various counties. So it was Otsego County and Delaware County. We worked through with CADE, with one of the ag orgs to kind of broker that deal with those guys.
I've seen some of the Discord threads and the Instagram posts and the longer pieces, and I just wanted to offer out that if it's helpful in some way, and I don't have a lot of ego attached to this, but I have worked as a family farm member of a farm cooperative. We started our distribution business as a worker cooperative, and I've partnered with consumer cooperatives and been a buyer for like purchase products from producer cooperatives as well. So if there's interest in some things cooperative, I'm certainly not all things cooperative, but I do know a fair amount about like worker cooperative legal structure and capitalization and funding sources. And you wouldn't necessarily know that from Googling my website. I'm not necessarily advertising myself as like anything other than just someone who's like made a lot of mistakes. And but still, I still do think that the cooperative model has a lot of merit, particularly when hardworking folks have a common goal in mind. I think that's sort of the right auspices for a cooperative. It's certainly no free lunch, but it is a good vehicle for getting some specific things done that meet the needs of the members. And I think there's a lot of, it feels really complicated if you don't have the cooperative boots on, and once they're on, then you're off to the races a bit. And I'd be happy to help anyone who's looking to just say, would this work in a cooperative, or would that not work, or how badly would that not work? I'm totally game for some of that, and I've suffered through some mistakes that I made, and then I've had some successes as well. So I've got I got some war stories, but I think maybe some helpful advice. And I like the idea of, I do think, if you're a farmer on this call and if you've got a decade under your belt, or maybe just a few years, it sounds like you're gonna be a hot commodity for a while yet. And so, have some sense of I think you do have some sense of your value, but, if small farm numbers are declining again, and I think they might be anecdotally, and probably there's some post-pandemic statistics will start to support that, then those of you who are still farming are in a strong position in your industry, and you should be cognizant of that position, and don't be shy to remind all of those funding partners out there and all of those client partners and all of the other folks in your business ecosystem of the fact that you are still farming, and don't just like let them take you for granted, because I think there is a culture of taking farmers for granted, that they will milk those cows till they die, and then they'll leave the cows in the land to their kids, usually a male white kid, and they'll keep milking those cows till they die. And I think that whole culture is just like complete BS, and it holds back many forms of progress, some of them obvious from what I said, and some less obvious. And I think it'd be a great day for the American farming if small farming was a more mobile career path. You could get into it, you could get out of it whole, you could get out of it whole in mind, body, and finance. And also that it was not just honored in like the, oh my God, I love my local farmer, which I think has a short ROI. Feels really good for a couple of years, and then you pay for it for the rest of your life. And maybe honors it in other ways, like you would some of our even less contributing careers that we expect to be remunerative over a long period of time. I think maybe as a farming culture, we have like this like legacy of like humility and meager incomes and suffering. Suffering is really popular among farmers. Like, I suffer more and therefore I'm more successful. I think if we can challenge some of those in our own culture and say, like, in there, don't get me wrong, I love a post from Chris when he's like all beat up from wrestling hogs all day or whatever, but I also feel this sense of like yeah, like let's tell people this more, when he was like, yeah, and by the way, I make a profit after paying my loans. And there's a sense of like, he's fighting a powerful narrative out there, which is that farmers should be poor and farmers should be uneducated and farmers should be white and farmers should be male and farmers should inherit their land, and on and on and on and on and on. And I think that, if we start hearing this narrative, oh, we are losing farmers, we're losing farmers, we're losing farmers, and we sort of just get tripping on that sadness narrative, then you guys are going to lose even more. So there's a narrative to be told that, like, hey, I'm a farmer, I'm here farming, better value me while I'm here and pay me my $12.99 a pound for pork chops or whatever the thing is, to make a living. And I just want to kind of put that out there, because I have seen, been through the recession, and I don't know if we've seen a high times yet, but we're headed for hard times again. And I think that don't let anyone take you for granted the fact that you're farming. Don't let them take for granted that you will continue to farm as things get harder and harder and harder. Like, we've seen a lot of that in this country. And if we don't fight back against it, there's no one out there with a laundromat saying, like, I will continue to wash laundry for my community, even though I'm losing money doing it, and electricity rates just went up 30%, at least in this state. Like, so I don't know. Don't be taken for granted. I think it's really easy for people to take even the best things they love about farmers for granted. And I would push back on that intentionally. So I'll get off the soapbox. Nobody wants me to stay on the soapbox.
Great. That was an inspiring, rousing speech. And thank you for standing on that soapbox.
I liked it.
I mean, there's a certain thing about like taking away the long suffering nobility of farming, and like that long sufferingness is I think a lot of why a lot of us are leaving the field. Like, the romance can't keep up with your body, or vice versa. Like, your body can't keep up with the romance. And one of the things that I tried to unsuccessfully drill into the heads of people that were at 40 acres and some of the people working at tropical farms, like, there's nothing wrong with farming just being a goddamn job. Because jobs in a lot of ways are nice. Like, if you have a good job, you're paid well, there's a retirement plan, you might have a chance at profit sharing and ownership. You don't necessarily have to work until you die. You're allowed to get weekends off. Your work doesn't have to be your life. You can go on vacation, you can say, fuck it. You can change companies, and you can take your skills and your money and everything else with you. And there's nothing wrong with that. And it would be nice to have an ecosystem like that revolved around sustainable agriculture that may or may not involve small farms. I don't think it's any secret that I'm a little sideways about small farming, just because of my indigenous background. Like, we didn't do small farming. Farms are friggin' enormous, and everybody participated however they could. And it was hard work, but it wasn't a suffering thing. It was just a thing you did, and then you worked on your pottery, and you went fishing, and you like played around with your kids, and life was life. It wasn't this thing where, I don't know, you're like this agrarian kamikaze, like sacrificing your body and everything else about you to do this thing. So I feel that, like, that is the thing that needs to go away. And I think a lot of what this conversation is, well, first for me, like, selfishly, this was a sanity check. Like, I'm feeling like small farming is deflating, And I'm like, am I just in my feels? Or is this real? Are other people feeling this way? Are people going through what you're going through, which is, I mean, that was a hell of an image that Miranda put out. Like, you're going through QuickBooks and you're like retiring QuickBooks and going to some other ERP, and you're going through a list of like all the farmers that aren't there anymore. Like, it's like that scene in Band of Brothers where Sergeant Malarkey goes to like collect people's laundry, and this Irish woman is like, help me find a few other people, and they're all dead. Like, they're just all dead. She's just like naming all these people, and you're sitting there like, holy shit. So yeah, I think from here, I guess a lot of the question is like, what do we do? And I think we've started to talk about a lot of that, and I feel like the answer is as simple as it is difficult. It's recognizing the amount of capital and resources that it takes to take small farming into something that's more professional, that's more streamlined, that's more like a regular job, but not in the toxic ways. That's more like other career paths, but not in those toxic ways. In a way that integrates people from different fields, that casts a wider net than farming, that starts availing ourselves of expertise that's adjacent to the farm, that's in different parts of agricultural sectors, that goes into food service, that goes into inputs, that goes into things beyond the farm gate, that goes things beside the farm gate. And I, of course, don't have any answers about exactly how to do that. I'm not that smart, but I'm hoping that as we continue to have conversations like these, that it sparks people to think about that. And as you guys like get into your regional pods or your technical pods or whatever other smaller kind of breakout communities we're in, like, you know, you guys can talk about that in smaller groups and in more detail with people that you trust and whose I don't know, whose lives are a little bit more like yours. Like the people in my Chesapeake pod, like we can speak a really similar language compared to people that might be in Texas or Canada or California or whatever. I would like to just quickly bring it back, because I know we've had some people hop on kind of in the middle, and we've been talking a lot about money and networks and all this stuff, and I think we've kind of like gotten down a rabbit hole in terms of like what the original discussion was about, which is totally fine. I like organic discussion that way. But I'm just putting in the chat again, real quick, the initial questions from the Patreon, if anybody wanted to, especially anybody who hasn't spoken yet, would like to comment on any of those. And I'll put it out there again, like, don't be shy. You don't have to be brilliant. You don't have to like feel like you've got this polished speech or whatever. Like you can just ramble like an old man, like I do. You know, I'm interested to hear like what are you feeling, man? Like you don't have to have like this thesis or whatever. Just how are you feeling about this shit? And yeah, that's really it. Anybody?
Thinking about a decade ago, that's when we started here on this farm. And our plan was to milk cows conventional and then transition to grazing. Because, you know, that's what I'd been doing. But then we realized we were going to have to go straight to direct marketing, because we were going to have to milk 93 cows just to break even here. And you can't milk 93 cows on 30 acres. So I'm really, really glad that the FSA made us do a business plan. I was really annoyed at the time, but that was like a real oh shit moment. And I always kind of thought like we were kind of at the sweet spot where 10 years ago, where like there was awareness of small farms buying like direct from the farmer, but it wasn't flooded yet. You know, so like there was still space to get in. And then it seemed like a few years later, like things were pretty crowded. And I don't know if we had gone to the stores even 2 years later, if they would have found space for us on the shelves. Now I'm wondering if it isn't opening up again. I feel like I have kind of conflicted. People with money during COVID all of a sudden were like, hey, let's go to the country and be free. I follow one or a couple grazing groups on Facebook, and it's like, at least once a month, somebody says, we just bought our first 80 acres. What do we need to know? And it just drives me crazy because, like, a lot. You need to know a lot. Like, you need to know more than, like, or what insurance should we buy? Um, at the same time, like, looking around, this is a very agricultural county here, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Lots of Amish farms, starting. Produce is a big deal here, but the dairy farms are closing up. And yeah, I don't know. Like, I'm working at filling out my USDA census. It'll be interesting to see what the next census numbers show.
Yeah, I don't know how people are doing it in dairy right now. Dairy is such a nightmare to me. I'm terrified of it. I don't know how y'all do it.
If I can't get up and milk cows in the morning, I get really, really lost. You had us a question one time, like, are you in farming for the legacy, or I didn't know how to answer it because it's just like, I've done other things, but I don't know how or want to do anything else at this point. It's hard, sometimes to look at the classified ads, and it's like, that would be okay for a little while. That would be interesting. But I bet they want me to show up one time every day, and that's not gonna happen.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Tim. I appreciate that. Anybody else got any thoughts?
Hi, I joined a little late, so didn't think I would talk, and I hate public speaking, so like this is so stressful. But I going off of what Tim was saying, and I'm in Pittsburgh, so we're kind of near Lancaster there. But you mentioned something making you write a business plan and how important that was. And the farm I work at now has they're like doors wide open kind of to the community. And I think a lot of people come to them having like ideas and they want to support them. They like want to support young farmers or new farmers or someone with a passion and idea, but then like things don't get written down clearly, or like the boundaries aren't super clear, and then it leads to like relationships kind of falling apart, and then that person leaving, and then maybe not farming anymore, or maybe, I don't know, not wanting to work with this farm that does want to support them. And so we've been talking a lot about how to bring like more professionalism into it, and like clear, like me, we were talking today about writing a job description for me because I don't really have one right now. And like it's working out all right, but it would be good to have like more structure there. But it's been really interesting to like be a part of creating that because they've never really had formal employees there. And I think what's kind of confusing to figure out is like how to find the balance of professionalism with that same feeling that like Tim was talking about like, I don't really want to do anything else. Like this is, I don't know, maybe something that you like, a feeling you get with farming that is romanticized, and I've only been doing it for 2 years, so it's definitely still romanticized for me. But I think it's also kind of real, and like, I don't know how to like have those professional boundaries, but at the same time, like when I was there today, I was late because my bosses, like they have 2 little kids and like had other stuff going on. So like I unloaded the feed. I did more than I expected to be doing, but I couldn't imagine not doing those things if it was like, oh, it's like 5 o'clock, like I got to clock out. So I don't know how to find like an adaptable professionalism that would work with a bunch of different situations. But now I feel like I have no idea what I've said and I need to stop talking. But thank you for, yeah.
Can I actually build on that? Yeah, so to bring the perspective of someone who worked on farms as like a summer job in college, I remember my first farm job. I kind of lied through my teeth to get the job, and I was the only one who was paid. The farm relied on unpaid interns to kind of sustain the model, which now obviously understand that that was a real bad sign for the longevity of the farm. And so like I remember my first day at 19 being like quote unquote the supervisor and supposed to like train all of these new interns because I was the one who like actually was paid. And I had two bosses who had these radically different perceptions of how the farm should be operating, and was kind of the person who was supposed to mediate that and kind of create like the standard operating procedures for these interns that I was, you know, managing. And anyway, so I've just been sitting here listening to this and thinking, I wish one of y'all was my boss in that job because would have saved me a lot of stress. So to go to that like issue of professionalization and these kinds of situations that we put ourselves in when we don't have effective field design and training, and we rely on, you know, unpaid work. Anyway, yeah.
I wasn't going to say anything because I was like, I'm not really, I work on a student teaching farm at a university. And so I'm like, I'm not really having to depend on the profits of the business that I run. It's a herbal products business. But I do feel like potentially there's a place for university teaching farms and being able to offer some like training and professionalism and like being a go-between of being a resource for people. Kind of like someone was talking about extension agents, and the farm that I work at, we started 10 years ago, and it's kind of small scale organic agriculture. And I think what is a little bit frustrating to me is all of us that have worked there. I've been working there, managing the herb program for 5 years. We're all really burnt out because the university actually hasn't supported us. And so it's been a group of individuals that have all been paid really poorly that kind of have an idea of supporting the community. And I think there's all this potential for us to be able to do research and trial production methods that then could be offered to growers, because we're not necessarily relying on the, you know, sales from the farm to be able to survive. But anyway, it's kind of like feeling frustration at the lack of support from the university for providing resources for small farmers. Like at UGA, at least I'm in Athens, Georgia, they care about like precision ag and genetics, not necessarily small farming. And so anyway, I think it could be a potential thing, but it has to be like a goal of the university to be able to actually support that. And we're not, the extension agents and the university doesn't really care about us. And at 10 years in, we're all kind of like, as individuals, burnt out. And I don't even know when we all leave if the farm will continue going. And so I think it's like a potential solution, but also we're all kind of feeling disillusioned at the moment. So a little bit of both anyway.
Thanks, Noelle. You had mentioned small farming there, and I just wanted to bring up a question that somebody put up in the chat, and I think it's a good question. Is it worth defining small? Or is that relative to, is that relative to region or state, et cetera? For example, in California, we consider small under 50 acres. And I know I've gotten that question a lot before. Like, when we say small, what the hell do we mean? Like, do we mean small compared to JBS? Which could mean lots of things. Do we mean small compared to, like, you know, a 3,000 acre cattle ranch in the middle of Nebraska somewhere? Or, it's such a fuzzy term because, even me, like on 100 acres in Virginia, like I'm a behemoth compared to some people, but on the other hand, I ain't nobody. I'm JV over here. I don't know, what are you guys' thoughts around that? Like what is small and what does it mean and what is it worth?
I think it's like it's just a moving target. Like, yeah, like I would describe the operation I'm working on as mid-scale. It's 25 acres of vegetable production every year. We have a small cow herd. We have 1,000 laying hens, and we run, like this next year, I'll be finishing 60 hogs. Like that's not like we're not feeding the world, right? Like that's not that crazy, but it like to me it's crazy, but and to a lot of folks that is the biggest, it is probably the biggest organic vegetable farm in the county. But it's like you said, in California, like that's literally nothing at all. And yeah, like it's like, are you in the sustainable, like the sustainable food movement? That might be really big. But like what is like the sustainable food movement compared to like the rest of the agricultural world? Like, and what are we comparing ourselves to? Yeah, but I mean, I definitely don't have an answer for that. Like what is small? I don't know.
Yeah, and somebody put in the comments, you could possibly define it in terms of revenue, which I think is kind of a thing. Yeah, it doesn't have to be land-based. I know there's, I know a lot of indoor gardeners that are like making a lot of money on like an amount of space that's like the size of this room that I'm sitting in right now. So yeah, I guess it is important to define terms. When we talk about like, is small farm winning? What are we talking about? What's winning? What's losing? What is the thing that we're trying to, preserve?
Okay, I'm not in the farm space anymore, but but I'm in environmental law and studied farm bill stuff. And compared to 10 years ago, to Chris's question, where we are relative to a decade ago, I feel like in my world, it's become a little dystopian. And part of that is this push for assetization of farmland resources and co-opting of regenerative language into assets that are now going to be traded on the New York Stock Exchange. And in my view, this poses a similar threat to like what credit default swaps, like you could create, in my view, you could use these, what's taking shape now using regenerative language and ecological language and create derivatives products like credit default swaps and stuff like that to trade on these different markets. And to me, that is a major threat to the possibility of any kind of like food sovereignty, food justice kind of vision that should be connected to this stuff. Basically creating these giant asset markets. And so that's something where like they use a lot of the language, but omit some of the concepts. And I don't know what to do with that. So I follow Chris's stuff because I'm kind of like, what the heck? This is as dystopian as I could possibly imagine it becoming. This exceeds what I could have imagined 10 years ago. That's a little different than some of the farm stuff, but in terms of like structure and land ownership and property, systems of property related to farming, I don't know if that ties into anything or anyone has any ideas or comments.
Oh, I certainly do.
I figured you would. I've been wanting to ask you about this because I'm like, I don't know who else. I don't know where else to go. Like, this feels so weird. Yeah.
No, I mean, it's it was inevitable that eventually somebody was going to do the regenerative ag what regenerative ag did to indigenous people. Like it was bound to get distilled again. You take indigenous values around landscape management and community and kind of the spiritual relationship between land and people and all these other things I can't describe in English. And then you distill it into a bunch of agricultural technicals that are targeted at people's neuroses around climate change and food, nutrition, and health. And then you distill it further now into asset classes and into branding and into regenerative travel, regenerative tech, regenerative everything now. This was the road this had to go down. And so I don't know, it is dystopian, but it's like, you saw it coming. Like we knew it was going to happen. And yeah, the big question is, what do we do about it? Because I do think one of the big things that I've seen change, not locally for me, but just on a national level, is the way land is looked at now. The amount of foreign investment that's coming to land, the amount of billionaires that are buying land as a hedge against craziness in the stock market and other asset classes. If you're in farming and you have a Facebook account, there's no way you haven't seen Acre Trader. People are treating these things like fungible assets now. Like it's nuts, but it's, again, completely within line of how this culture and economy works. And I don't know what, not a backup plan, but it does like severely threaten that model that existed 10 years ago, where it was relatively easy, at least in my area, to find land to work. Like back when I believe things that Joel Salatin said, for the most part, this was one of the things he kind of hammered on, was like, if you want farmland, kind of go door to door in rural America, and you'd be surprised who will say yes to you. And that's how I'm where I am now. As many problems I've got with Joel, like I followed his strategy right to where I am, making money and doing what I love to do. So that's something I get to sleep with at night. But I feel like that's less true now for people, especially for people in places where access to farmland is competitive, like the hotbeds of consolidation, especially in the dairy industry, in the grain industry. If you're in Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas, even parts of South Dakota, if you're in like friggin' Michigan, Wisconsin, like places like that, I don't feel like it's as easy as it maybe is here. Where land is just, I don't know, like I've seen prices for farmland out there that are just unreal. I mean, tens of thousands of dollars an acre. And I like, how? Like, how do you make farming work when stuff costs tens of thousands of dollars an acre? I'm sitting here paying $5,000 a year for 100. I'm a unicorn case. Like you can't really replicate what I do unless you're extremely lucky. And to your point about like, yeah, land becoming this, like just the next frontier in speculative investment again, because it was the first frontier in speculative investment, like, late 19th century, when they were sending, poor ass white people, free women, free black people, whatever, to deal with Comanche and tornadoes and shit. And it's like, here we go again. This land is like the new frontier, and it boxes us out systematically, unless we find, new ways to come at it. So yeah,
one of the things that, like, you mentioned you can't describe in English, and this is like something that I struggle with, is like I'm languageless. Like I don't have a language to talk about any of these things. And if I'm fearful that if we come up with anything, it'll just get rolled into this, other system. I can't talk about it in my, I just don't talk about it anymore. Because I don't know how to even, like either it's lost so much meaning, or yeah. So languagelessness is a thing that comes along with that. I feel like, yeah.
Yeah, that's something I got into it with Tabor about one time. She was pressing me to describe, like, with a term, like what this thing was we were doing that wrapped up like indigenous ethics and collectivized agriculture and all this other stuff. And I basically told her I'm not giving it a name. And if I do, it's going to be a Lenape name that has 500 letters in it, and no one will ever want to pronounce it. Because you're right, like everything is commodifiable, and in a very, very bad and dangerous kind of way. And yeah, I do feel bad for people who only have English to lean on, because it's so hard to describe certain terms, that especially around like the types of beyond just the dollars and cents of agriculture, but when you're talking about community and relationships with different elements of life, like that's a really easy thing for indigenous people who are lucky enough to have their language still with them to describe, but it's hard. American English is not oriented toward that, and that's unfortunate. Wade Davis talks about that a lot, like what's lost when languages disappear. You lose entire ways of looking at and describing the world in shorthand, and the consequences are real. I'm going to do a quick time check. It's like 9:35. I'm going to have to drop off in like 5 minutes, but I wanted to give anybody else that had any other final thoughts about this. It sounds like we could easily have like another couple of roundtables extend off this, like around a lot of stuff. I got like pages and pages of notes. I know Tiana's usually been keeping notes, but this time I didn't want to necessarily foist that on on you, so I took my crappy notes. I was really bad at it in college, and I'm bad at it now, so sorry.
I have notes.
Outstanding. So yeah, any other final thoughts before we mercifully allow some people to put their kids to bed or go to bed themselves, or watch Inventing Anna, or whatever else you're going to do?
One thought that I kind of had repeatedly in this conversation is I was just kind of thinking of the different successful farmers that I do know, and I don't know a lot of folks who don't have some level of land access, capital access, equipment access in a pretty extreme way. And that includes my own case by far. And like that piece is, and it's kind of either that or they're extremely small scale. And they might even have all those other things and still be like pretty small scale. And like that piece is something that I'm interested in. I don't know, I'm not going to explore it right now. I just it's always on my mind, is like how can we get people resources who want to be scaling up and who have the knowledge to scale up, to do that, because like that's like just super important. We're not, like a small scale farm is like a wonderful, incredible thing, and I'm so glad that they exist, and many of them should exist, but like for people who don't want to be there and who want to be bigger, that feels really important. And in my own farming journey, I've felt just super privileged to be able to walk into a situation where like there is land access, there is some level of infrastructure, and I can just start doing it. And then also like the other piece of that is also just like market access. And like that piece, I feel like I want to build more on our business, because if we can get labor, like the correct type of labor, management labor and field labor, we almost have like unlimited capacity to produce. And that's what I would like to do if I can sell that, and and not destroy myself in the process, and build that like big team farm, so like that, like that big farm, that team farm piece is super critical to that. And in my own journey, it's like, just can we build that appropriately before like before it's all just blows up in your face. And I think that we can, but that's just because like of the privilege that we have had. And so how can that occur? And that's not going to be answered now. It's just something that I'm thinking about all the time.
Yeah, like my thing with the Chesapeake group and Nat, I really want to get you into that because like my whole thing is I would love to have farms that are making it happen, like basically combine their markets and resources and allow people to specialize where they're good. Like in my case, back when we were doing the whole collective thing, like Sylvan Aqua Farms, like the legal entity, wasn't really going to be an on-the-ground farm anymore. Like Sarah and I were going to turn things to where our talents were, which was specifically towards marketing. Like people would come into this system, they would be farming, and they would not have to worry about where their products would go. Like that was kind of the point. It's like you can grow and you can just be a damn good farmer and not worry about it. And if you need extra money, you can work in the processing side. You can basically lend a hand, wherever you're able to, wherever your talents desire it. And the idea is if you have enough people, you have enough, I don't know, kind of network effect, then that is allowable to happen. And I'd really like to take another bite at that apple in a different way, instead of bringing in people fresh and raw and kind of relying on people's, I don't know, promises, I guess, but actually do it with people who are established operators who are producing stuff now, who have been producing stuff now, who are like making it happen and are trying to figure out, okay, how do we take that next step? How do we become that big team farm? How do we leverage, like, how do we start becoming specialized in different ways without necessarily giving up control and autonomy, but also without having to be so damn independent? So that's something I'd frankly love to talk with you about. I've been talking with Emma over at Moon Valley about the same thing, and Sarah over at New Roots. And we've pulled in a couple of, there's like a few chefs in the Chesapeake group now. So that, I think that'd be an interesting group to be in community with.
That's one of my biggest questions too. Like, that's what I want to figure out.
Yeah, I wanna like become a big sustainable farm blob with other like smaller bloblets like kind of in my area and like just slowly heal the earth, whether people like it or not, is kind of where I'm at right now. I'm gonna leave it open for one more comment if anybody has anything. Going once? Going twice?
I'm gonna say one more thing.
There she is.
No, but that I don't have like a full thought, but that kind of like blob, big blob, little blob model is kind of the goal of the farm where I'm working at too. And that's been interesting with my bosses. They've been farming for like a couple decades and like are connected to all the different organizations and like many different farms around. I don't know what my point was, but just that I lost it. That model of kind of like expanding through already existing farms seems like, I don't know, it seems to make sense to me in my head, kind of like being at an event and talking to a food distributor and then like another farmer who I just like enjoy talking to, and like realizing that we all want to collaborate with each other already, and like so figuring out how to like facilitate it when everyone is also busy, I don't know, seems like a next like step for that. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Annie. Appreciate that. All right, with that, I'm gonna go ahead and close it out. Thank you, everybody, so much. This recording will be on it'll be on YouTube. I'll send the link out to it whenever I'm able to get it uploaded, which probably won't be until Friday if I'm being realistic. I'm also going to put out a poll for maybe what folks want to talk about next, because I think a lot of new stuff got raised out of here. I think there's a lot more conversations to come out of what we talked about today. So thank you, everybody who contributed. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And I will see you next time, y'all. Be good.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Bye.